everyone. Welcome to our Bicep community call for August. This is our second community call. We're going to do this every month. All right, so meet the team. We did this last time as well, but I want, in case for the people who couldn't make last one, let's all introduce ourselves again. We have some more people on this slide who hopefully did make it today. So start with Alex.
Hey folks, Alex Frankel, PM on the deployments team.
Anthony?
Hi there, I'm Anthony. I'm a developer on the deployments team. You've probably seen me in the GitHub issues from time to time.
Hi, I'm Marcin. I'm a developer on the Azure deployments team.
Hey everybody, I'm Marcus Felling. I am a PM for Microsoft's developer division.
I'm Stephanie. I'm a program manager on the team, working on Bicep and ARM things. Changlong?
Hi everyone, I'm Shenlong. I'm also a dev on the Azure deployments team working on Bicep.
And we have Bobby and Steven who aren't here today, but they are on the DevDip team. Marcus, if you wanted to give a quick summary.
Yes, Stephen and Bobby are both devs, helping me out from Microsoft's developer division, contributing to Bicep. So yeah, I don't think they're on the call.
They're not, okay. I hopefully just change the permission so anyone can join, but if not, we'll deal with it. Okay, I want to introduce our new core maintainers. This is something I'm super excited about. It's great to have more users be more involved in Bicep, and it's great. So if you guys want to introduce yourself, Ben?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. I'm a Microsoft employee and happy to help out the community for Bicep any way I can. Yeah, look forward to your contributions to discussions or issues, and yeah, having fun so far.
Hi.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I can go next. My name is Stefan Ivemo, located in Sweden. I am also the maintainer of the Bicep PowerShell module, if you try that one out. So I will also help out with a couple of discussions and the issues part, and trying to add a couple of more snippets to the repository as well.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Stefan Point. I'm from Canada. Very excited with the Bicep project. Been a ARM user for a very long time, and this is very something I'm thrilled to contribute to. So discussion, issues, bring some code sample, and try to just make life easier for people, and yeah, just contribute to this great product.
Thank you. And is Nikolai here?
I thought he said he wouldn't be able to make it.
Yeah, I don't.
Unfortunately.
Okay, sure. And so Nikolai has been very active with the Bicep GitHub. He has been helping us so much. We reached out to him to be a maintainer. And yeah, welcome everyone. Really excited to have you. Okay, so how to communicate in this community call? Use the chat. We're going to be monitoring the chat and answering questions as they come up. Sometimes we'll answer them in the chat or on the call. And at the end, there's going to be a questions and answers portion. So if you have questions, you could raise your hands, unmute yourself, and we could just talk to you directly. What is the community call for? It's for you guys, not for us. Any questions you guys have, demos you want to see, please let us know. We always track it in the GitHub issue. Yeah, we're going to make sure to answer all of your questions. So what's new? Alex?
Marcus, I'm going to take this slide. Yeah. So yeah, let's jump right into it. So these are the highlights from our most recent intermediate Bicep release before we deliver 0.5. One particularly useful new feature is expanded go-to definition support. So you can now click on things like the path of a module and go to the actual module definition. Same goes for module params, module outputs, resource and variable properties. So if you hold control and hover, you'll see links where go-to is implemented. So this makes consuming and toggling between a bunch of modules super easy. There were some UX improvements made to the visualizer. We now have a source for Azure resource icons that we've started to feed into the visualizer. So right now there are icons for common resource types. It also now honors and will adjust the Visual Studio Code theme you choose, whether it's light or dark. And then lastly, we added Bicep build to the file and now tab context menu as well. So this makes it easy to simply right click and build any Bicep template without needing to go to the command line at all. So next up, I can demo some of the latest and greatest features. Let me share my screen. All right, how does that font look to everybody? Look good? All right. So I'm going to fly through these. Feel free to follow up any questions during our Q&A at the end. So in 0.4, we introduced a linter that'll inspect your code as you're typing and catch a customizable set of authoring best practices. So as you can see here, I have a bunch of yellow squigglies that indicate I have some linter rule violations. So I can walk through this quickly, and you may have seen portions of this demo during the MVP session. So starting at the top here, I have a secure param top secret password. If I hover over it, it's throwing a linter violation. It's saying secure parameters should not have hard-coded defaults. Yeah, that makes sense. I don't want to check in my passwords to my infrastructure as code. So I'm going to leverage the quick fix. That'll remove it. And now again, if I hover over the parameter itself, it's saying it's declared, but it's not actually used. So this is really helpful to just go through a template and clean up over time. Similarly, for variables, we'll also catch variables that aren't actually referenced anywhere. Working my way down here, I have an automation account. And in the name, you can see I'm using interpolation, but that's actually not necessary. I can just reference the parameter name itself. I don't need any fancy syntax there. So again, fix that up. And then the last one down here, you can see I'm using the concat function. In Bicep, you don't need to use the concat function. You can simply use string interpolation. And maybe I don't know what that means. Maybe I'm new to Bicep. So again, I can leverage the quick fix, and I can see that cleans up my syntax pretty nicely here. So I can just tack on -schedule. I don't need to use any fancy concatenation. All right, so I'm going to reverse. I'm going to back up here. As you may have noted, these are all yellow squigglies, indicating these are warnings. So this will not fail the build. They're simply warnings, simply with information. They're just there to kind of help you along and assist you. But if you want to break the build, say in your CI/CD pipeline, you can add a Bicep config JSON file right alongside your templates, and then you can override those defaults. So just by adding this file and setting the level, I could set it to off if I want it disabled. I could set it to warning, info, but the secure parameter thing is really important in my environment. I want to make sure that we're not letting any CI builds through that have passwords checked in. So I'm just going to toggle that, switch it to error. And then when I go back to my Bicep file, you can see here, oh, and I didn't reverse far enough, but if I actually entered a value here for my password, if I wanted to hard code that again, you can see those red squigglies there. So yeah, I get IntelliSense in this file. So maybe I don't know what rules are available. I can come in here and I get a drop down. I'll just clean this up maybe and show a better example. So if I was starting from scratch, or maybe I just had one rule in here, control space gets me that IntelliSense, and I can see all these rules are available. Yeah, maybe I don't like the linter at all. Maybe it's getting in my way. In that case, I could just disable it. All right, so moving on. And fix this up again. Make sure all those squigglies go away, or I actually just disabled the linter altogether. So this file looks fine. I'm going to make sure this actually works. I'm going to make sure it gets through the transpilation process successfully. So I'm going to use that handy new right-click build feature. So I can right-click on the file menu, or just as of this week, it was merged in a change to use the tab menu. So it's also available up here. Maybe I have this window closed. I don't use that window very often, so I can just build it here. And you can see in the output window, it created that transpiled ARM template JSON file. So you can see this here, spit out an ARM template, and it added this metadata saying this came from Bicep. If I had an ARM template in my source control here, maybe I handcrafted it. If I go to right-click build with the same name, it's going to throw an error and it's going to say, hey, go fix this up yourself. We want to make sure we're not overriding your ARM template that maybe wasn't created from Bicep. All right. Also, just on the linter front, we have work slated for both 0.5 and 1.0 to add a bunch of new rules and meet feature parity with the Azure Resource Manager Template Toolkit, also referred to as ARM TTK. So that will come in the near future. So moving on. We have a bunch of scaffolding and snippets to help you so you don't need to handcraft your resources from scratch. A while back, we added the required properties after the equal sign, and this looks at the resource type Swagger, and it will add all the required properties for you so you don't need to guess or go to documentation. So pretty cool. This similar functionality is now exposed inside the properties body. So again, maybe I already crafted this and gave it a name and a location. I get that same required properties that pops up here. So pretty cool. If you're not already familiar, the snippets have been around since 0.4, but you can see here in these previous examples, I was creating an alert rule. So I could just start typing and I get snippets with not only the properties, but values that I can get this up and running really quickly. So say I want something like an AKS cluster. I type AKS, hit enter, and that gives me a really good starting point. You can go and contribute your own snippets today. In the root of the Bicep repo, there's a contribution guide for snippets specifically. So follow the instructions there. If you have a resource that you create kind of over and over again, you think a snippet would be helpful, go get a PR submitted. All right. All right, for this one, I'm going to highlight the go-to-def improvements. So here I'm consuming a module called Registry. I can hold down Control and then click on the reference, and then boom, it brings me to the source where that module is defined. Similarly, with these registry parameters, that'll bring me to the definition. And now you can also see here, I can see the description without actually needing to go to that template. So I can quickly hover here. Maybe I'm consuming this module. I can just take a peek at that description here and find out what it does. And in addition to control cover, you can also right click and go to definition. All right, last example here. So I got to give credit to Justin Grote for this policy example. On the left-hand side here, I have a policy.json file. This is an Azure policy definition. I can now consume that definition, the contents of that definition inside Bicep using load text content. So you can see here, I'm referencing the policy.json file. And now I throw that into a variable. That way I can reference its properties to define my resources. So I have a policy assignment here. And I get IntelliSense when I'm referencing that variable now. So I can see what's inside of that variable. I don't need to hard code it or have a messy. Somebody needs to go on mute. I don't need to have some long inline JSON definition. I can just reference it like so. Same with display name and description here. All right, so next I'll hand it over to Marcin to talk about the registry.
Yep, I'm just switching over to take over the slides. There we go. I hope everyone can see my screen.
Yep.
Okay, so awesome. So the Bicep registry is really just a mechanism to share Bicep content. And in 0.5, we are planning to support publishing modules to a registry, as well as, of course, consuming them from whatever you publish from the registry in other places. And in future versions of Bicep, we will also support pulling down custom linter rules, custom analyzers, and types when we decouple them from updates to Bicep core, and as well as extensions that bring in support for non-ARM resource types. Bicep content is stored in container registries as OCI artifacts. So as many of you probably know, OCI stands for Open Container Initiative. It's kind of the umbrella spec / organization that basically covers everything related to containers, container images, their life cycles, etc. And that spec was extended to support non-container content, which they refer to as artifacts. So that's what we're using. If you have, we can talk about the reasoning behind it during Q&A. And if you're also interested, we had a session at the MVP Summit that we published. We published the non-NDA portions of that to YouTube, and hopefully someone can drop a link to that in the chat. I see you, Alex, started typing, so I'm guessing that's you. Awesome. So if we're interested about reasons why, we can talk about that during Q&A as well. Regardless of that, we wanted to make sure that the user experience with the Bicep registry is as simple as possible. So let's say if you have a module or Bicep file on the local file system and you want to publish it to the registry, all you really have to do is just run the new Bicep publish command. And that command will compile your Bicep file, do the normal validations that you would expect during Bicep build, and then publish it to the registry that you specified with the name and tag that you specified in the command line. If you're working in the CLI and you've got a Bicep file that uses modules from the registry, we will have a new command called Bicep restore, which will validate, which will parse the specified Bicep file, find all the references to external modules, and then pull them down from the registry to your local file system to cache them. And if you have existing workflows that use the Bicep build command, it will run Bicep restore by default. Unless you have a specific need to opt out of that, there will be a switch called no restore that will kind of disable that. But if you're just running Bicep build, or if you're running this as part of your by invoking the Azure PowerShell or Azure CLI, it'll just work as before, except now it'll also pull down the modules from the registry, basically. And if you're working in VS Code, the language server itself will run Bicep restore in the background as you're typing. So the moment the language server sees a syntactically valid reference to a module in the registry, it'll try to pull it down to the local file system. And as soon as that succeeds, the language server will be able to use that newly acquired type information from that module to provide completions and to do all the the type checking, the validations that you would expect from just any other module in Bicep. And I will demo all that functionality actually in a moment. We will, of course, let you create a private registry. Since we're using container registries in Azure, this will be an ACR. You can create an ACR instance, set up auth, grant permissions to whichever users are appropriate in your organizations to push or pull artifacts as needed. And then once that's done, all you really need to do is run the bicep push, or I forgot to update that, bicep publish command, and the modules will land in the ACR and be available to be consumed. And then there will be a official public registry, and that will take the form of a public GitHub repository where Azure teams and the open source community will be able to submit pull requests with new modules. Of course, those pull requests will go through a CI validation job. There will be an approval process. But once signed off, the content will be pushed to the Microsoft Container Registry, or MCR for short, and which is where all of the Microsoft Container images and artifacts live today. And of course, Bicep will be able to consume them directly from there if that's something that you want to do. And on top of that, we will not restrict you from creating your own public registry if you want to. Like, you'll be able to onboard to Docker Hub or anything else and push content there if that's something that you want to do. There will always be an option that's available for you. But let's jump into the demo. So here I've got a VS Code running, VS Code extension running, our Bicep VS Code extension with a private build of Bicep, and I've also got the CLI from a matching build in the path as well. And the module that I've got here deploys to a subscription. We're deploying a research group, as you can tell by the name of the RG. I shamelessly stole this from Alex. Hopefully he doesn't mind. We have a kind of a malformed attempt to deploy an app plan that isn't quite finished, and we're deploying a bunch of websites in a loop driven by this hard-coded array here. You might notice here that this doesn't quite look like a normal module reference. Like today in Bicep, module references are really just relative paths to some Bicep file in the local file system, but this isn't that. Now, of course, we will remain, we will be able to continue using that for local modules. That's not changing. We're not breaking that syntax. But to support the registry, we will introduce a new syntax to basically reference a module in the registry. The syntax itself hasn't been finalized. Each component that I'm going to explain in a second may change in the future, but conceptually it should stay about the same. We may add a colon here or there, but all the components will probably remain. So the first part that's kind of new is the prefix here, which is the scheme of the reference. It kind of tells us exactly which protocol we should be using to pull down the module from the registry. So Bicep registries will obviously be able to talk to a container registry, but in the future we will also expand this to cover things like template specs, which will be a different protocol. Most likely the prefix for those things will be TS for template specs, but that hasn't been finalized yet. The next component is the URI of the registry itself that we're using. In this case, I'm pointing to my the private ACR that I've set up for this demo. And then we have the path to the module itself, or in OCI terms, if you're familiar with that, it's called a repository. And then the final component is the tag that kind of serves as a version of the module. So let's finish this. Let's get this thing to compile here. We've got a bunch of errors, most of them due to this malformed attempt at deploying an app plan. But before I do, let me see what I published so far for the app plan. So this is my private ACR. You can see the name matches. I'm going to click to view the list of repositories, which you can think of as a list of modules that were published, or really artifacts and container images that are in that registry. And I've published here a bunch of examples from the Bicep repo, as well as my demo plan module here. I've got a bunch of versions here all the way to V8, but I'm not particularly happy with them. They have all kinds of issues. So I'm going to publish a new one. So I'll switch back to VS Code, go back to my terminal here, and I'm just going to move Alex out of the way here. And here is a Bicep publish command. So we're doing Bicep publish, specifying the main.bicep file, because I am in the directory where my plan module actually lives. And then I specified the location where I want to publish the module. So it's a similar kind of reference. We've got the registry, we've got the path to the module, and the tag. Now the CLI syntax is not final. We're still discussing that, but for the purposes of the demo, it will suffice. Conceptually, you'll have to provide the same information. You'll have to provide the registry, the path, and the tag. So in a moment, it should complete, ideally. And once it's complete, let me switch back to the registry just to prove that I'm not pulling a fast one here. I pushed V9. V9 should appear after I refresh. There it is. It's published. So let's actually use it. So let's go back to VS Code, type in the reference here. Now, we will have completions for most of the segments of an external module reference, but this build doesn't have that yet. So I have to just type it in manually. So I'll type in the URI of the registry URI. I'll type in the path. And then I'm about to type in the tag. But before I do that, let me explain what's about to happen, because it'll happen fairly quickly. Right now, this reference is not valid. I'm missing the tag. The moment I type in the tag, the language server will actually attempt to pull down that module from the registry. So this error will actually change to something that says module has not yet been restored. And once the process completes, it will change. The squiggle will actually disappear because the module will be cached in the local file system at that point. If the process fails for whatever reason, let's say the module doesn't exist, or the registry doesn't exist, or I'm not authorized to pull down artifacts from that registry, then the message will change to the actual error that you got. So let's type in V9. And you'll see that this says module has not been restored. And in a moment, hopefully the squiggle will disappear, and it just did. And now the module is in the local file system. So I've got all the completions. So let me put a name, plan, deploy here. This module also wants the scope, so I'm just going to use the RG that we have. And then if we look at params and request completions, we've got completions for name parameter names because we have the module is available locally. So I'll just fill that in. All the validation went away. All the errors rather went away, and we can build this thing. So if I build this using the nice and convenient right-click build command here, open the JSON and search for plan deploy. Here's our nested deployment that the module compiled into. And here is the server farm resource that came from that module that I pulled in, the demo plan module, which came from the registry. So that's pretty much my demo. I'm going to hand this off to Alex now to talk about various options for referencing modules from the registry.
Marcin, while I'm pulling things up, this is really cool. This is the first time I've seen publish used, so it was a fun demo for me too. Can you talk about how auth is going to work to ACR?
So we are still finalizing the details. There is this in what we call track 2 SDKs, Azure SDKs. There's this concept of a credential chain, and the SDKs provide what's called a default Azure credential, which looks at a bunch of options, tries to get the credentials either from environment variables, tries to see if there's if you can get an MSI or managed identity, or pull credentials that are like stored by Azure CLI or Azure PowerShell or even Visual Studio itself. So it kind of tries to pull those ambient creds somewhere from your environment if you can find them and use them. So that's kind of going to be our default story. but we will provide some config options to customize that. So you'll be able to control which types of creds we look for, but it should be pretty standard if you're used to working with like .NET SDKs. It should feel pretty familiar. And if you're using something like running this in a container with an MSI, it'll just work. Like my experience on my local dev machine, which I was actually blown away by, is I've been using Azure PowerShell there to kind of manage some of my subscriptions, and I just let it run just to see what happens, and it just worked. So in most cases, we expect it to be just that simple. If not, we'll give you some knobs to tweak that a little bit. But it should be as simple as that. And then the one thing that is kind of still an open issue is how national cloud support will work, because over there you need to provide slightly different configuration, and you have to tell the tools that they're talking to the specific cloud. In those cases, most likely they'll be exposed through config, unless we can find a good way to make it just as seamless as possible. But I'm pretty sure we won't be able to.
And then the other question that might be worth answering, Stan was asking if can we support like a semantic versioning scheme where if I say I want version 1 of a module, will you pull the latest 1.star kind of thing?
That is a good question. In that regard, we're somewhat limited to what we can do with OCI itself. So you will be, for sure, you will be able to push the same content under different tags. So if you'd like, for example, when I pushed V9, nothing's actually stopping me from pushing the same identical module many times. In fact, I did that when I was testing my demo. All the V5s to V9s are basically the same content. So you would be able to set up for servicing scenarios, or if you let's say a V1 that is always all of the versions of V1, and you can also push the same content to like a more specific like V1. I don't know, 15 tag or something like that, if that makes sense. So you will have the flexibility to set that up yourself. I don't know yet if we're going to provide that out of the box for you, just automatically.
And I think, part of the reason we probably won't have time to get into like the various options that we considered for our backend for the registry, but one of the reasons why we picked OCI was to kind of get the network effects of the container ecosystem, which is much larger than the Bicep ecosystem. And presumably they have the same problem with versioning and would want to solve it. So we're all kind of working together to figure out what is the best way to do all these sorts of things.
Exactly, yeah.
Cool. I'm going to go through this somewhat quickly, but like Marcin mentioned, we have kind of a rough approximation of what this module reference syntax it needs to look like or is going to look like, but we have some opportunities to tweak things. It's really mostly an artistic choice, so we're trying to get a pulse from all of you about what feels good, what feels bad, and we'll try to take that into consideration as we get closer to finalizing this. I will say that we'll do the first release of the registry, and if we've totally botched the URL pattern, we'll give ourselves the opportunity to fix it, but we do want to get a sense of it now. So I'll break down what this is composed of. Marcin already broke it down a little bit. So we have this notion of a scheme, I think we're calling it. So in Marcin's demo, it was OCI. I think for the first release, it's going to be BR for Bicep Registry to kind of abstract away the fact that we're using OCI. It's more of an implementation detail. And then for template spec references, it would be TS. We have this notion of an alias that is not implemented yet, but in your Bicep config, and we'll probably have one default for public or the equivalent of the public registry. So you don't have to type the full registry ACR or MCR URL, and you'll have the ability to set your own aliases for your own registries just to make that a little bit easier. And then the path to the module, and this can be broken down into a whole file structure. So if you have if you want to have folder paths to different groups of modules, you can do that sort of thing. And then the version tag, which can be anything. It doesn't have to be semantic versioning. And again, we just inherit that from the container ecosystem. A few other versions that you might see of module references. So this is with the full URL. and no aliasing. And you'll notice that I've switched this to slash, because if you actually went and copied this in ACR, you would have the slash in addition to this URL. And then the template spec reference, this is kind of what it has to compile down to at some point. We're going to try to optimize this because you don't want to put in full template spec resource IDs, but this is the idea that we'll change the scheme and then you'll provide the path to that template spec. Where we need some help is just getting a pulse on some of the options that we have for kind of these separators of breaking down these components. So one is 2 colons. The scheme, 2 colons, the alias, 2 colons, and then the actual module. And then 1 colon is something that we inherit from the container ecosystem. So we're a little hesitant to kind of mess with that. A single colon, this would kind of keep everything aligned with the version reference, and you may not want to, do 2 colons if you only need 1 colon. So this is a version with 1 colon. There are probably other options that we could come up with, but any really strong opinions, any like you absolutely cannot do it this way because of this reason, I will keep an eye on the chat for a second.
Should we do a quick poll, like put in the alternatives and have people just like them, whichever that one is they like, so we get a nice count?
Yes. Does anyone know how to set up a poll?
No, let's just do it. I'll set it up.
I can do that.
Oh, go for it.
Set up the poll. Yeah.
Any questions about this? Is this making sense more or less? I like the idea of the bicep emoji as a separator. Let's get our Unicode going. Okay, we'll let the poll come through and I'll talk through the other option, which may not even be something that we can play around with, but I am curious. Second, what's that?
I sent the poll. Is that what we're asking?
Yep, perfect.
Great.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Mm-hmm.
Double colon, Nathan asked a good question, like where's double colon coming from? We use double colon actually if you do a nested child resource. So if you have a storage account and then inside of that you have a container, if you need to get a property from that inner resource, we do double colon as the separator there. And I think it's used in a few other languages and a few other places as well. So it's not totally without precedent. And the other thing worth calling out that I forgot to mention is we have talked about our extensibility plans to allow Bicep to deploy other non-Azure resources like Kubernetes deployments or AAD objects like service principals. Most likely, whatever we pick here as the separator, we will also pick there as the separator because there's kind of similar scenarios. So keep that in mind as well. The other one is for the version separator in particular. So the only weird part about the single colon separator here, even though it aligns with how containers does things, which makes sense, is it is different than how we do versioning for our API versions for resources. So there's a little bit of an inconsistency there. So one option at least worth discussing is having an @ separator just to align with where else we're using that. But like I said, we may end up not really having a choice on this one because we need to comply with some OCI specifications there. Any confusion or clarification I can add here, or any like burning desire one way or another?
Should I add another poll for this one?
That would be awesome.
Okay, cool.
Oh yeah, C++ does have : which brings me back to like sophomore year of college when I learned C++. All right, we will let the card. Oh, we may not be able to do external votes. All right, well, if you can't vote, just put your vote in the chat. We will assemble it later the old-fashioned way. That's pretty much it. So hopefully that was some good insight into how the module registry is going to work. We're pretty darn excited about it. We can't wait to ship it and see what everybody does with it. The last thing we have before we go into Q&A, we have about 20 minutes left. Our friend Ryan Nowak, who's part of the Office of the CTO under Mark Ruzinovich, has been helping us out with some language improvements and has been considering some ways to improve parameter validation and declaration. So he's going to walk through some of those options to get a bit of feedback from that as well. So take it away, Ryan.
Awesome. Thanks for the setup, Alex. As he mentioned, I'm Ryan. I do a lot of work with the Bicep team, and I've been building a lot of things with Bicep. And I'm a compiler nerd, so I like to help out where I can with this sort of thing. So I'm just going to introduce a problem, and then we'll talk about some solutions. And I'm really curious to see what people in the community have run into with this problem and like what your scenarios are. I think is if you share that information with us, it's actually really helpful to figure out, like, are we choosing the right solution? So I've got a load balancer resource here. And like, if you've worked with load balancers before, you know that they're pretty big and complex. Like they have a lot of deeply nested sorts of things and properties and rules and big lists of stuff, right? So I might want to build a module. And again, really simple, like I might want to build a module for a load balancer, and I might want to factor out some of that code and reuse it from other places. And if I'm defining a load balancer rule, you know, a load balancer rule kind of looks like this, right? It's got an ID or a name, it's got properties, and the properties here, you can see there's kind of a lot of properties, right? So I might want to be able to pass a load balancer rule as a parameter into my module in order to make this code more reusable and better factored. But the problem that I've got is that when I try to define a type for this here, there's really not a very big set of types that I can use. And the best type that I can define is object. Or if it were an array of things, the best type that I could define would just be array. And so when you look at the usage of that and you come over here to this rule, you'll see that like, well, this is totally fine because there's no type checking. So the compiler today can't reason about the fact that this doesn't match what the load balancer expects. And that's because you had to declare this parameter of type object. The other thing too is if you try to complete for this parameter rule, you can see that there's no suggestions here because we don't really know what's supposed to go in there for that rule. So this is the theme, this is the problem, which is where we've got parameters and to a certain extent outputs. Can we, and they're complex objects or structured things that are parts of a resource, can we do a better job and give you better tools to describe those things? And so some of the examples of solutions that we might take for this is, one of the simplest things is, well, we might give you a syntax to reference a type. And just excuse the squiggles here. None of this has been implemented. These are just examples of things that we might do to make this better. So imagine that you could say, okay, I want to reference the load balancer rule type that's part of the load balancer resource. And imagine like I come here and I type this and I see completion for all the different types that could be used to make up a load balancer. That's one option, that we could give you the ability to complete those types and just declare what type it is based on what types the resource provides. And these are the same types if you've used Azure SDKs to automate these things. These are the same types that generally get baked into the Azure SDKs, similar kinds of naming and things like that. And they're just coming from the open API definitions of these resources. Another option that we might do is we might do something like this. If you use TypeScript before, you might have seen this kind of construct or some other languages. We might give you a way to assign a type based on sort of dot completing an expression. So the idea that you could say, this parameter, I know it's going to go here, so give me like the element type of load balancer rules, which this syntax probably needs a lot more thought. But if you think about it, a way to say, hey, I know that it's going here in this resource, so declare the parameter with a type that will match that resource. And so anything that you could dot to or sort of array your way to in any of your resources or any of your variables would become eligible for you to declare parameters at that type. And then we wouldn't evaluate this expression, we would just type check it to get the type. And then taking that idea even further, the other thing that we could do is, well, we could do target typing. We could say you could declare this as auto or var or infer, but the idea is that based on where the parameter is used, we could do type inference and say, well, we know that this parameter is going into a list of load balancer rules, so it must be a load balancer rule and assign it that type. The drawback of this approach is obviously that if you're using the parameter in multiple places that have different semantics or different contexts, then we might not be able to infer a very useful type from it. But for these simple cases where your parameter goes like one-to-one with a resource and it is a complex object, we could do a pretty good job with that. The other really interesting thing about this that's kind of close to my heart is for properties, if you wanted to infer, like let's say backend address pools, let's declare a parameter pools, param rule or param pools auto. The idea that, well, because we know exactly where this property goes, we could do things like attach the description, attach any validation constraints, or any of the other metadata that's coming from the Swagger based on this property definition or based on this type definition. And the whole idea here is just that we make it easy for you to write good modules that are reusable. And hopefully some of these ideas go really well with the idea of distributing your modules, which was seen earlier. So if you want to help us out, if you want to get involved with this, I think some of the most useful stuff, in addition to your comments on which of these options you like, is help us understand what problems this can solve for you. So have you hit these cases? Have you not hit these cases? Have you ever thought about passing complex objects back and forth with Bicep? And then what do some of your examples look like? Like, what are some of your real world cases you've hit? We want to make sure when we're doing these things that we're actually addressing problems that you're having. And we may need to do multiple. So the more data you can give us on how you would want to use features like this, the better. There is an issue here. It's issue 4158. This has got a little bit more detail here than what I was able to show and talk about in this short presentation. So we would appreciate your feedback on this issue and in the chat. And I'll hand it back to Alex or Stephanie.
Does anyone have any burning questions or any feedback that they want to give to Ryan right away? Maybe we'll take just a couple more minutes if there's a discussion to be had. Otherwise, we can move on. Okay.
I'm curious if I'm blowing people's minds. Like, have you ever wanted to pass complex objects back and forth in Bicep? Have you thought about it? Are there scenarios that we could simplify if you could do that?
Couple yeses.
Couple yeses. Somebody's got their hand up. Kevin's got his hand up.
Go for it, Kevin. Or did you want to say something or just acknowledge that I had?
I was going to say something. I figured I'd raise my hand. I wasn't sure if we were jumping to audio or just chat. So to your point about complex properties, an example, just working through deploying Cosmos DB with multiple DB accounts and multiple containers, but then also having a dev environment of serverless, but then doing setting different throughputs. So having to have some accounts with, say, 2 or 3 containers and other accounts with 3 or 4 or 1 container, having to have some complex layouts. I don't know if that's complex. That's complex for what I've been doing so far, but there's a lot of looping in different areas of the module to make that happen. I can see like the firewall rule is a very big thing too. You're always going to be passing more than one firewall rule. To have a module you can loop through and pass in just the unique configurations to it would be really nice, because that's where you're probably going to put into a parameter file anyways. I would see that as being very nice to be able to just pass in the parameters I need to a loop for the firewall rule and then just add that object into the resource. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, so the topic that Ben just said, what he said in chat, is something we talked about here, and we didn't have a great solution for how to do it in the first cut of this, which is for cases where you want to specify a subset of the properties. So this resource defines these 5 properties for this object, but I really only want people to be able to set 3 of those.
And Ben, if Ryan really wants to implement custom types, and I keep
I do want to.
Don't implement them yet, please.
I do want to. So this is I think one of the earliest discussions that Alex and some folks and I had about this was, do we want to implement user-defined types, like as in you define your own types like you're writing a struct or like you're writing TypeScript, or do we want to implement aliases? So I think we want to see, if we give you the ability to reference the existing types, how, what percentage of the challenges that people have does that solve versus going all the way to user-defined types? I think Alex has said it's something maybe eventually, but might be a lot to throw at people right now.
You can't put that back in the box is my main concern. Cool. This is great, and it looks like there's a good chunk of interest. And Mikolai got here late. I know he has expressed a lot of interest in expanding the type system and custom types and all that kind of good stuff. So hopefully the issue gets a lot of discussion. Cool. Thanks, Ryan.
Thanks.
I think we're now in Q&A. Is that right, Stephanie?
There was one more slide I wanted to show everyone.
Cool.
Just one thing that Alex had already mentioned in chat. I don't know if everyone saw that, but basically moving forward, we're going to have our community call sign up. The invite only be sent out to people who are signed up for this newsletter. If you don't want the newsletter and only want the community call sign up, also let me know. But for now, we'll have things announced on Twitter, Yammer, all of those places, as well as this newsletter. So people who are outside of your community or anyone else on your team who wants a community call invite, just have them sign up for this link.
And the newsletter is called The Workout, so we're really leaning into our dad jokes.
Yes. It's great. Bicep, arm. We're gonna keep going until someone stops us.
Okay, cool. Anthony answered Matthias's question about passing resources as parameter types. We are definitely, Anthony's already started laying the groundwork for some of those things, and I think it's going to be a really big positive change. I think it's just going to make modules just feel that much easier to use, and the resources feel more native, regardless of how big your project is. So I think we'll be really excited to have that. Okay, we are in Q&A mode now. We'll keep an eye on the chat, but if you'd like to come off mute, feel free to go ahead and do that if you have any questions you wanted to ask. Joel is asking about a toggle that you can only set in the storage account data plane. I think in general, our philosophy is like, if you can get it into the control plane so that it's native ARM, that's our preference. But we do expect to expand. I think we talked about extensibility in the last community call, and we definitely talked about it in the MVP call that we linked to. So we're going to have the ability to have Bicep and ARM templates actually provision non-ARM resources. So we're going to start with Kubernetes and Microsoft Graph, but we expect there to be scenarios like those static website toggles or pushing data to a storage account or a SQL database and so on, where we'll probably expand that list to other kind of like critical Azure end-to-end scenarios. Our strategy right now is to kind of get the Kubernetes one and get the Graph one out. We expect to learn a lot from what people do with that, and then expand from there for whatever the most critical scenarios are. Barbara asked about the expected timeline for 0.5 and 1.0. So 0.5, which is the next release, I think if we get it out in September, we'll all be pretty happy. We're in like the closing maybe stages, depending on what Marcin says of the registry. So I think we'll do some testing and get that end-to-end done and get out the 0.5 relatively soon. 1.0 is the next planned release after that. which we're tentatively saying by the end of this calendar year, so the end of 2021. I think the one thing that, we may do an 0.6 release if we feel we need it. With the registry and with extensibility, those are some pretty big fundamental changes, and we may need to do a couple more breaking changes than we had initially planned, depending on how all that goes. So in between 0.5 and 1.0, there may be one other release, but generally speaking, we're trying to get to 1.0 towards the end of the year. Let's see. Bill, you had a comment about the linter. I don't think I'm totally following that one. I don't know if you can come off mute and talk about that a little bit more.
Well, when I use existing objects, it still gets banged out even though it works. In the syntax checking, I assume that's linter.
Meaning you're getting a warning when you use existing?
Yes. It says expected the equal character at this location.
Sounds to me like you could be using an old version of Bicep. Is it possible your CLI or your VS Code extension isn't running the latest?
I'm using .3.539.
That is an older version, and you'll want to make sure that the CLI version gets updated and the VS Code extension gets updated. I think the latest is 0.4.6 something something.
Okay.
If you have any issues, just ping us and we can work through that.
Okay.
Greg had a question about having being able to pull in Bicep config itself from the registry, basically not having to constantly remake it. One thing you could do is have it at a higher level in your directory structure. So you might have all your Bicep projects in one directory. And then if you put the Bicep config at that level, then all the projects will inherit that Bicep config because we'll walk up the directory tree until we find one. So that may be a way to mitigate that problem. I don't think we've thought about really having the config itself in the registry so that it could be pulled.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I was thinking about this from a MITA where my company went to, where Des got told you are now in charge of all your IAC. We've made some reference stuff for you. Here you go. And like having that kind of living in the public registry, they could just say, okay, we can grab this and we know that we're going to be communicating to the right items, private or public, going forward, or follow the same rule syntax. So we didn't have to make a lot of, say, investments in OPA for IAC validation later on.
Yeah, I think the need you're describing is certainly legitimate, and I think we should keep thinking about that and see if there's a way to optimize basically sharing that Bicep config more easily.
Okay, and yeah, I'll also make an issue on this so it's just tracked as well.
Cool. That would be awesome, Greg. Thank you.
Different note. Thank you for starting to work on the shared variables issue as well.
Well, yeah, we have the load text content, which I think we're going to just abuse as much as possible. It's working really well, and so if that, hopefully that works for bringing in shared content like that. I know there was a comment about it kind of bloating the JSON, especially if you use it in multiple places. Our perspective on that is think of the ARM template as like a deployment artifact or a deployment binary. You shouldn't have to care what's inside of it. If you do, we've kind of screwed something up. If you do hit the limit of the JSON, that's a different story because we do have a request size limit. I think there was another comment about that as well. So if enough people start hitting that limit, we'll have to figure out how to optimize that. At the moment, it's not proving to be a significant issue, but if you have particular cases or repros, we can certainly take a look at that with you. Any major questions I am missing in the chat?
Alex, this is Jose from Microsoft. I have a quick question regarding
Sure.
Key Vault and perimeters.
Yeah.
I started something actually it was for myself, but it might turn into something for a customer. Is right now you can use Key Vault when when you want to populate a secure perimeter, right? That's currently the only way you can use it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Because the scenario was like this for this guys, they have like their templates to deploying VM. So my idea was to create those templates by somebody that develops them and then publish them through the pipeline into Azure template specs, right? And all the VMs they create have standard admin passwords, workspace IDs, and things like that. So all those things are in Key Vault. And right now, each and every new VM that's going to be a new template, right? And it has to have the Key Vault reference in the actual VM Bicep, not the actual module, but all of them should have the same standard for all VMs they create on a daily basis. So that was my dilemma in that case, right? So I wanted to make standard, but everybody that creates something out of that Bicep in VM needs to have that Key Vault piece there, right? Whereas they could just give like standard VM parameters name, blah, 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 and all the stuff would come from the original main template. You know what I mean?
And the secrets exist prior to this VM deployment, or they're created as part of the VM?
They exist. It's a standard currently, local admin for all the VMs and stuff like that, right? So,
got it. Have you seen the get secret function by any chance?
I've seen it's there, but you think it should, instead of using parameters, use get secret inside the module? It would be a possible solution for that?
You would do that outside of the module. So it ends up transpiling to a Key Vault parameter reference in the nested deployment that we generate, but it should allow you to have a common code base for all the VM deployments where you use that get secret function and say which secret name that you want.
Okay. I'll look into that.
I mean, if you're having issues, feel free to open an issue or reach out to us and we can kind of work through it. I'm curious to see what's going on there.
Okay, cool. I'll do it. Thanks.
Cool. Question about complete mode / deployment stacks. I think in the last community call I said it's definitely going to get out in August. I think I'm going to be proven wrong. It should definitely get out in September though. I think we're doing our third bug bash on stacks today, so we're in like the late stages. So maybe the first 2 weeks of September, something like that. And if you haven't signed up for the private preview, I have a link somewhere. I'll add it to the chat so you can sign up for the private preview. We are 3 minutes over. Any last burning questions anyone has that we can answer? Can I get a cool Bicep hat or t-shirt? We don't have hats or t-shirts yet. We have buttons that we're very eager to give people in person when we can. And I think we will, next time we have an in-person conference, we will try to have a bunch of t-shirts and sweatshirts that we can just give out. People have asked us to buy them from us, and we have no capacity to manage that. So we're just going to give them out as soon as we can give them out. All right, I think that's it. Thank you everyone as always for joining and all the things that you guys are doing out there in the community. I'm very happy to have new maintainers and not be answering as many questions. The new maintainers are doing an awesome job. And then so many blog posts, videos, all sorts of things. It's really, really awesome to see. So thanks everybody. See you next month.
We're working on the swag, I promise. Thank you guys.